Welcome to this explainer. Okay, let's just dive right into the fascinating and, let's be honest, incredibly frustrating mystery behind Ireland's universal social charge, or as we all know it, the USC. If you've ever stared at your payslip, let out a massive sigh, and wondered why a significant chunk of your hard-earned cash just vanishes every single month, well, you're in exactly the right place. We're going to break down the real truth behind why this charge exists, where it actually came from, and tackle the ultimate question: will it ever really disappear? Picture this. It's 2011, and Ireland introduces what they called a temporary tax. Now, this was absolutely positively never supposed to stick around. It was sold to the public with a really desperate, very specific promise. This was just a short-term fix. It was pitched as a completely necessary evil right in the middle of a crushing financial crisis, basically an emergency patch to stop a sinking economic ship. But here we are, over a decade later, and we have to ask the exact question that pops into everyone's head when they check their pay. Why are we still paying it in 2026? I mean, what actually happened here? How on earth did a temporary, crisis-driven Band-Aid become a permanent, everyday fixture of our financial lives? Well, to figure that out, we really have to go back to the beginning.
Section 1. The Temporary Crisis Fix.
So right after the 2008 financial crash, Ireland's economy essentially fell off a cliff. Tax revenues totally collapsed, and unemployment went through the roof. The government needed money, and they needed a lot of it, incredibly fast. So in 2011, they introduced the USC as part of this massive emergency budget. It specifically replaced two old charges, the income levy and the health levy. But here's the catch. Unlike those older charges, the USC was designed to cast a much wider net. Lower thresholds, way fewer exemptions, and it hit almost all income. It was built to rake in reliable cash quickly with the crystal clear promise that it would vanish once things got better.
Which brings us to Section 2. The Recovery Paradox.
And man, this really hits the nail on the head. The USC quietly shifted from a temporary measure to a reliable revenue stream. We hit this completely massive contradiction. The economy actually recovered. Growth came back, employment got better, and corporate tax receipts surged. But that emergency tax? Yeah, it didn't budge. Instead, as the country bounced back, the government just kind of quietly changed the fundamental purpose of the tax. It completely stopped being a temporary fix and just became a fully embedded part of the furniture.
Let's look a little deeper in Section 3, the Fiscal Balancing Act.
You really have to contrast how governments view their different streams of income. On the left side, you've got corporate tax. It's incredibly valuable, right? It brings in massive funds thanks to multinationals like Apple and Google, but it's wildly volatile. On the right side, you have the USC. Broad-based, super predictable, and incredibly stable. It's taken straight out of our income. It doesn't wildly fluctuate just because a tech giant decides to change their strategy at a quarterly board meeting. Let's actually define what that volatility risk looks like. Volatile revenue is basically government income that can just plummet because of external factors out of their control. Ireland relies so heavily on a tiny number of multinational companies for a huge chunk of its corporate tax. If even one or two of those guys restructure, move their profits, or if some new global OECD minimum tax rule kicks in, that revenue can just vanish. This looming risk is exactly why holding on to the ultra-stable, boringly predictable cash from the USC becomes an absolute, unshakable necessity for the government. When global uncertainty spikes, governments group onto local stability. Let's shift gears and look at Section 4, the psychology of the USC. Unlike standard income tax, which has pretty clear standard bands, the USC is layered like a cake. Step 1, it starts out pretty low on your initial income. Step 2, as you earn more, that rate climbs. But Step 3 is the real kicker here. It applies to a wildly wider base than standard income tax. It grabs income that might actually be totally exempt from normal tax thresholds. It reaches way deeper into your earnings than you'd intuitively expect. And this whole setup creates what we can call the payslip squeeze. You get paid, you look at your slip, and you see income tax. You see your PRSI. And then right there, sitting right next to them as a totally separate line item, is the universal social charge. Seeing it separated out like that creates this real psychological weight. You earn a bit more, but a huge chunk of that extra money gets sucked into this layered system. It's a constant, glaring reminder, especially for squeezed middle-income earners, that makes the entire tax system feel so much heavier, even if technically Ireland's overall tax burden is just about average for Europe.
Now, for the billion-euro question in Section 5. Can it actually be abolished?
Removing the USC isn't just about scrapping a tax people hate. It is literally like pulling out a load-bearing wall in the Irish economy. It brings in billions of euros every single year. You take that away, and boom, you have an immediate, massive hole. So welcome to the replacement dilemma. What on earth replaces those billions? Do they hike up regular income tax, jack up the VAT, make brutal spending cuts, start borrowing a ton of money? None of those options are politically fun or easy. The USC survives not because anyone likes it, but because it is undeniably, unbelievably useful to the state.
So the really crucial thing to understand here is the massive gap in the logic politicians use. There is a huge difference between abolishing a specific tax mechanism and actually reducing your overall tax burden. Technically, sure, the government could abolish the USC tomorrow by just rolling it straight into standard income tax. Your payslip would definitely look cleaner with one less deduction. But if they just raise your normal income tax to cover that lost revenue, your actual financial hit, the money leaving your wallet, remains exactly the same. You wouldn't feel a single cent of difference.
Because at the end of the day, the state is on the hook for massive, inescapable expenses. They need billions for endless public spending demands, massive infrastructure upgrades, sky-high healthcare costs, and desperate housing investments. All of that stuff requires rock-solid funding. It practically guarantees that the state simply cannot afford to just hand back a perfectly good, steady income source like the USC when these colossal bills are piling up.
You know, there's a pretty interesting, slightly weird historical truth at play here. Temporary measures very often outlive their original purpose, unlike, say, certain ambitious ventures of the German colonial empire. Okay, yes, it is a completely wild and deadpan comparison, but history is literally packed with so-called temporary measures that just kind of awkwardly stick around and blend into the background. And in Ireland's case, it blended seamlessly and permanently into the background of our payslips.
So we're basically left with this brutal, undeniable reality. The universal social charge is temporary in name only, but entirely permanent in function. It was a tax that was absolutely not meant to last forever, but it was designed absolutely perfectly to work flawlessly for the government. It solved a very real, terrifying short-term crisis and then just quietly moved in and changed the locks.
So I'm going to leave you with a final provocative thought to chew on. Instead of asking if the USC will ever be officially abolished, maybe the actual real question is, will the government ever voluntarily give up that revenue? Are they really going to surrender a massive, unbelievably stable cash flow? History and basic economics say there is absolutely no way. So next time you see that USC deduction, just remember, it wasn't designed to last, but boy, was it designed to work. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep asking those tough questions.